So today is June 24th, 2021. My name is Maria Saldana, and I'm here with Viv Moran. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Can you start by telling me when and where you were born?
I was born in Peru, January 21st, 1987. My mom went into labor January 20th, so I could have been a Capricorn, but, porque soy bien dramática, I decided to come out the next day. So I was born on a Wednesday at 11:03 a.m. And my mom went into labor during el toque de queda from the Sendero Luminoso attacks. And I was born in San Borja, but I was raised in El Callao.
Okay. So we have your entire birth chart basically on record.
Pretty much.
But okay, so, a beautiful Aquarius sitting in front of me. And you said you were born in San Borja, but were raised in Callao, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you said your mom went into labor during el toque de queda.
Yes.
Okay. So, where did you grow up then? You said Callao, but was that where you were mainly?
Yeah, so we lived in El Callao, and it was really, really hard. According to the story that she told me, she said it was really, really hard to try and get transportation. So I don't know if maybe we were in Lima, in like Miraflores, because that's also where some of my family is from. And I don't know if we were there and it would have made it easier to go to La Clínica, because I wasn't born in a hospital. I was born in a clínica privada. And maybe that's how she traveled over there. But I grew up in Peru till I was about 4. And then we migrated here to South Jamaica.
Okay. South Jamaica, New York, yeah?
Yep.
Okay. And where are you currently?
Currently, I'm in Flushing.
Okay. So, all right. And where else is your family from? You said Lima.
So, my mom's dad, my grandpa, he is from Cerro de Pasco. And my grandma, my mom's mom, is from El Carmen.
Okay.
And on my dad's side, oh my God, it's either she's from Huancavelica, according to him, but then his older brother says that she's actually from Ancash.
Okay, so a lot of different places, right, in Peru.
Yeah.
Okay. And
as for his father, I have no idea.
Sometimes it's like that though, right? Like even the stories, like you touching on, your own birth story that I imagine has so many different pieces, right? And I know from experience speaking to other people, even in my own, I just think that there's always pieces of the story that maybe we don't have, maybe that answers. Would you share a little bit about your relationship to your Peruvian identity?
Oh my God, this Peruvian identity has been so hard. Growing up, I know in Peru, there was the pride there, but then coming over here and not having anyone that identifies as being Peruvian except for your family. And, lucky for me that we lived on this block, and on that same block radius, my dad's friends, his brother's friends that grew up with him and went to school with him, they also lived within that same block radius. So when we had the family get-togethers, the Peruanidad was there. But outside of those family parties, everywhere I turn, I grew up within Black culture, and that is all I knew. Mm-hmm. It's to me, I often think about, what it would have been like if we knew more Peruvians outside of our family, grew up more within the Latinidad aspect. And then even in going to school, like the school that I went to was predominantly maybe 98% Black. And then the other 2% was, white Latinos. And then back then also in the 90s, the only Latinos were Puerto Ricans and Mexicans. So you're either Puerto Rican or Mexican. And then you don't want to be Mexican because, they were just given such a bad rap from the beginning. And so it was hard for me, very, very hard for me. I'm there, I'm brown, I'm not Black, but I'm not indigenous enough. I'm not Black enough, but then I have this giant curly hair. So it was like, what is she? What was she? And so I grew up with a lot of self-hatred when it came to like identity, no soy de aquí ni de allá. So it was really, really hard, trying to identify. And then even, as I grew older, trying to meet like more Peruvians was also really, really hard because, again, I didn't look like what Peruvians believe Peruvians are supposed to look like. Like, how can you deny this cara de papa? Like, how can you deny this? And it was like, are you sure? Are you sure you're Peruvian? Like, why would I lie, B? Why would I lie? What am I going to lie about? I could say I'm Puerto Rican. I could say I'm Dominican. Like, why would I lie about being Peruvian? And it's like, for them, I guess they don't want to see the Black and the indigenous put together. It always has to remain separate, which is baffling to me because there's nothing better than to have these two incredibly rich cultures mix and then create something just as beautiful.
Absolutely, Viv. Thank you for sharing that with me. You touched on so many pieces of, I think, Peruvian identity encompassing racial identity, pieces of migration, what that looks like when you're in the diaspora, right?
And that was also really hard because in Peru, I was well off. My parents were well off. My mom, she paid her way through college by herself. She has her bachelor's in journalism. She used to work for the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries. She worked as the publicist, in charge of like the money that goes like in and out and stuff like that. And then my dad, who was an aprista, had his government position working with Alan Garcia. So from living like a good lifestyle, me and my sister, we had our own nannies, to then coming over here and living in a 1-bedroom basement apartment, sharing one queen size bed. Like, I often say that the US has an amazing publicist when it comes to the American dream. Nobody knows about the realities. Nobody knows of the pobreza that you live when you migrate. You think you have it good and you think you're going to have it so much better, but that's not a reality, especially if you're not coming here with quote unquote papers, or if you're not working within the field that you went to school for. My mom works as a housekeeper with a degree in journalism, with the background that she has. For her to be a housekeeper, and my dad went to school for engineering. And who knows what this man does, but like, nobody talks about those things. Nobody talks about the hardship that comes with immigration. We were pushed out. We didn't choose to come here because we wanted to. We were good where we were at.
Absolutely. And gosh, like I'm sitting with what you shared, right? Because it is true. What happens when you leave your home country, that the life that you live in your home country is never going to compare to the life that you live elsewhere, outside of it, right? And no matter what the position you have in your home country, it's never going to match where you are somewhere else. And I think that you're describing a very real process that happens in terms of, I think, migrants having to then figure out where they belong,
Mm-hmm.
at least that's not where they're from, and where
Yeah.
everyone's perceptions of them is not what the perceptions were back home, right? And who knows what the
Yeah.
perceptions were even like back home. But you're naming very real struggles with class. You're naming very, very real struggles with, not having access to resources. Like migrants don't have access to proper resources,
No.
right? Like to this day.
Yeah. And then I was lucky, I'm very like, once I asked my mom like our real story, like I humbled myself a little bit more because, I was lucky because of my dad's position, working with Alan Garcia, we were able to get our visas. Within the government, they wrote him a diplomacy letter as an invitation. They named him as a diplomatic man. Who gets that? Who gets that? And I feel incredibly lucky and fortunate to have had that opportunity. But then looking back, it's no wonder why people travel without their paperwork. It's hard. They make you go back and forth. Somehow you're always filling out the application incorrectly. Nobody wants to help you properly. Even your own people sometimes be your worst enemy. They don't want to help you. They look at you like, I mean, este pobretón. They don't think about how people just want to survive.
Yeah, Viv, of course. And, also I think you're naming that, you're touching on your family's position, right? Your dad getting this letter. And it's so interesting, right? How we can come from a place of privilege in a certain space, and then you move, right? Literally physically move. And sometimes it's not by choice, right? You name that your family was pushed out. And how those privileges suddenly turn into the things that oppress you, right? It's always a shifting, it can shift so easily. And so when did your family migrate?
We migrated, let's see, my sister was born in 1990, so I want to say maybe April 1991.
Okay. And that was still the time of Sendero Luminoso, correct?
Yep. Because I also remember talking to Connie about that, because Connie was born in 1990, I believe, as well. And what her family lived right after I left.
Right.
So I'm just like, wow, if we would have stayed there, how would we have been affected? Because then after when Fujimori took over, that's what pushed us out. My dad could no longer have the job that he had because Alan Garcia wasn't president anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. And interesting, right? How all of these larger forces, systemic, structural, impact us so personally, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's impacted. I see it in the Peruvian people so deeply, right?
Yeah.
In so many different ways. So I'm grateful that you're touching on these pieces, that you're sharing this part of your story, because I think it's important to hear. And even you naming that you discovering, are you hearing the real story from your mom, right? That, like, I imagine that was a really important process for you, right? For you to go through, for you to hear that.
Yeah, like I had interviewed my mom and released it as a podcast episode. And just, like listening to her and, how we grew up, because I don't remember much. Mm-hmm. My memories are from the countless albums that I still have stored, because I just can't part with them. I haven't seen my family. It would be a total of 30 years, maybe even more. The last time I went to Peru, I was 15 years old, and I couldn't remember half of them. And the way that I kept their memories alive was through my albums. Mm-hmm. And just having some type of like context on the memories that I lost so long ago, and then knowing my mom's real story, and then even my father's, like I didn't even know that he had a background in engineering and blueprinting. Like I didn't know that his intelligence level was that high, you know, because I have my own experiences with him that are different than what my mom experienced with him, you know. So it's, I think when talking about identity, you can't just mention just one piece. You have to go back and talk about everything from like the beginning, because that's, even with my own identity, it's a learning process still. You know, both of my parents are Afro-Indigenous, both of them. And I didn't come to terms even, you know, with my own Blackness for a very, very long time. And that is from, you know, being told that para mejorar la raza, tienes que casarte con un hombre blanco. And from being told that, it also created even more of an issue, you know, within myself and my skin color, being a Peruana. Like, why can't I marry somebody that's Peruvian? Why does it have to be a white man?
Yeah, for sure. Just those narratives, right, of what it means to, like, what the stereotype of the right Peruvian is, you know. Who's not Afro-Indigenous, right? That's what we're told to believe is the bright Peruvian. That's
con sea que sea blanco, que tenga su dinero, su buen trabajo. That's how it's going to work. No puedes casarte con un cholo porque, you know, los cholos son ignorantes, no tienen educación. Y no te puedes casar con un negro porque el negro te va a malograr la vida y te va a dejar con hijos.
Right.
The black man is lazy. They can't hold a job. They just want to have a whole bunch of kids and leave. So it's that constant narrative that almost, you know, makes you hate yourself and makes you hate where you come from. But, you know, I've done the work and I've learned to forgive, because even my grandmother's story, like, she was one of 12 kids. And the way that she grew up, like, you know, being Black in Peru and seeing all the injustices because of her skin color. And then even the injustices from her dad, because her dad was, had another marriage. And even him being a certain way with his own children that were darker. So, you know, with my grandma, you know, I've learned to forgive that it wasn't really her, that it was the experiences that she went through that she was trying to save me from. And I think that's the goal. You don't want your kids to go through what you went through, even though it's not going to be the same. But if we kind of think about what we're still going through now, it almost is the same, because you're still being discriminated against, even by your own people, because your skin color is not light enough, or your hair isn't straight enough, your nose isn't thin enough, and your lips are too big.
Yeah, and it's not like that's changed, right? In Peru, that those sentiments of tenemos que mejorar la raza, that hasn't changed. Right? That racism, that classism, that's still there. The sexism in Peru is still there. And also there's something to be said about the ways that's also perpetuated in the US, right? In a different way. And there's anti-Blackness in the US, there's anti-Indigenous sentiments in the US, right? Like,
yes.
And so I imagine it's been, you know, and it sounds like as you're speaking, right, it's been a journey for you to navigate so many different perceptions from different cultures, you know. And you also touched on, you having to do that work, right? That labor. And so I'm wondering where you're at now, right? You spoke of that process, you spoke of that journey, what you've gone through. Where are you at currently in thinking?
I'm still working on it. I'm still working on it because I feel like when you are trying to create a certain type of not just acceptance within yourself, but trying to heal from generational trauma and trauma that you've had from growing up, being a child of immigrants, being first gen, being an older child, because now that's a whole nother story. When you're like an older child and you have a sibling, I mean, la responsabilidad te cae a ti. So not only healing from that type of resentment of not having a childhood and being a parent as soon as you fucking land on US ground. So it's still an ongoing journey. I'm still healing. I'm learning to love myself a little bit more. I'm learning to live in the security of, my own identity and continuing to fight for it, not just within myself, but for my nieces who are also Afro-Indigenous. If the work stops for me and I feel that, what, I'm good. I'm finally secure. I still can't stop because I have to continue to do it for them because I do not want them to carry the generational trauma. It literally has been living within our genes. We carry generations on generations on generations of trauma from our ancestors that it is molded within our genes and it has literally changed us. And this is why we live with depression. We live with an internal sadness that we don't know where it comes from. We could be living, our best lives, but we still carry an internal sadness. And that is something that I strive every day to heal so they don't have to carry it. And even when they want to heal from it, I'm always here. I'm always here to walk them through it because, I can't shield them from certain things. It's my sister's job as a parent. But all I can do is lay a path for them to walk on when they're ready to heal.
Thank you, Viv, because I see and I hear all the work that it is to, I think, come to terms with our identity, come to terms with the intergenerational trauma, our own trauma that we've gone through. And I always say that it's labor, right? It's constant work to do it. Mm-hmm. And it's always going to be a process. And to even think of, your nieces, well, that's like the mindset of a future ancestor, right? Each of us are future ancestors in the making. And like como amiga, like I am even grateful to be in community with you because
oh my God, Maria, same, no me hagas llorar. But listen, I will always be grateful to Connie for what she did with Alegría Peruanex. I have never seen so many Peruvians in one room. So many. And I love her for choosing to put a Black woman on the flyer because I saw my grandmother in her. Mm-hmm. I saw the healing. I saw the beauty. And I want my grandmother to see her own beauty. Something that she never got to feel completely.
Right.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. Like,
no me hagas llorar.
Quiere llorar. Listen, in my tears in my own eyes, I am collecting these, these testimonials, these narratives, and I was really intentional in calling them testimonials, right? Because I think that the people that I've interviewed so far, have shared so much of their story. And in that, right, there's always a radical potential, I feel, when people speak on their story, when we have been so historically erased, right? Like,
yes,
I was told I'm sitting in academia in this position of privilege, and I was told, oh, you have everything at your fingertips, right? The academy is going to give you everything you need. I was like, okay, well, I would like to see Peruanos, right? I want to see my people. Where were they? They weren't there. And then even more than that, I want to see queer Peruvians. Where are they? And they weren't there. And it's not to say that the work isn't being done. It absolutely is, right? And I think it's being done in so many ways, like Alegría Peruana. It's like your podcast, right? It's being done in ways that we're able to share our stories and like become part of a larger narrative. So I'm really grateful for you to like being here, sharing with me. So, you know, you're touching on your journey with your Peruvian identity, and I don't want to assume, so I'm going to ask, but is it meaningful for you then to have a relationship to Peru or to your Peruvian identity?
It is. It's very meaningful because I feel that I've been so far removed. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm not there. I'm not with my family. I don't have that familial love. And attaching myself and working with my community to better the representation of Peruvians, not just for them, but for us too, living in the, you know, diaspora, because we're all, you know, so far removed. And our identity continues to be taken from us because we're not there. It's like we have to be there in order to identify, you know, and continuing to attach myself to what Peru is today. I feel it also keeps me grounded and reminds me that I have to keep going.
Yeah, I hear you on what the distance does, right? It can sometimes cause like almost a distance within yourself, right? It's like, how can, like you said earlier, right? Like why would I lie about being Peruvian? You know, mm-hmm. Why would you lie? Like there's no reason to, you know, but it makes it so not being there, then there's always constantly, you know, I feel like this process of having to remind ourselves that we still are Peruvian, right? Like we still belong, like we're still worthy of being Peruvian. Mm-hmm. How then do you maintain your relationship to Peru or to your Peruvian identity?
Talking about identity, mm-hmm. Talking about my experience as a Peruvian person, mm-hmm. Talking about even the ugly of being Peruvian, because you can't just talk about the good. You have to talk about the ugly. Good can't exist without bad, and bad can't exist without good. And I think that it is important to constantly mention, you know, the bad experiences so that way they can be fixed. Mm-hmm. And Pumas, being part of the Pumas collective, has definitely, you know, brought things full circle in how I can continue to do the work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear you, and I think that, you know, thinking about what happened in November, you know, 2020 with the coup, and then to suddenly, right, I mean, speaking for myself, I felt so distant from Peru all of a sudden. You know, I knew my family was there, I knew my loved one was there, they were going through this, they were out there protesting every night, and then suddenly I also had people in the diaspora, you know, reach out and were very intentional in thinking through how, even with distance, right, we can remain connected. Yeah. And I'm so grateful for that community. I'm grateful for Pumas, for the work that we're doing, right? Mm-hmm. So people in the diaspora, Peruvians in the diaspora, can continue to stay connected to our home, And it's
Yes.
so important, you know. I'm so lucky that like you and I have gotten closer through Pumas as well.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I'm grateful. I've never had so many Peruvian friends.
I know.
Never.
Same here, you know, and I think that's also why I decided to, you know, archive the pieces. You know, I mentioned earlier how like, I didn't see us in the academy. I didn't start seeing us on social media until Connie released Alegría Peruanex, you know, and then I was plugged into so many Peruvians doing beautiful work.
Yeah.
But I think along those lines, you know, you shared earlier that you didn't see many Peruvians growing up, right? Growing up in New York. And neither did I, you know. And so for me, I think part of the reason that I'm doing this is because being Peruvian, being queer Peruvian is really central to how I identify. It's central to how I move through the world. So I would have loved to know that there were other folks out there, you know, as well.
Yeah.
But, you know, shifting to talk about queerness, can you talk to me a little bit about your queer identity?
My queer identity is also an ongoing process. I think I've known since I was a little girl. I used to look under my friends' uniform dresses to see what kind of panties they were wearing. And I can remember that very vividly because, you know, so in the school we used to have this like jungle gym, and we had this round thing, and it had like a little entryway, and I would just like lay there and look up, and I can just see everyone that climbed. And I remember having my first crush on my best friend, Shaniqua. She was just so beautiful. She had like these hazel eyes and long curly hair. But then I also used to have a crush on this boy named Anthony Cooper, who was her boyfriend. And I got so mad one day, I forgot what he did to her. And he gave me these flowers to give to her. And I didn't give them to her. I threw them on the floor and I stepped on them. But I remember her being my first crush. And I think after that, like I long forgot about it. But I've always, my queerness was something that I've hated. I've hated it with a passion. I didn't want to be that person because I've always heard, mejor puta que lesbiana. And I didn't want to be that, you know, and I've always had, you know, my little crushes on girls, but I've never acted on it. And I think I've also found myself in really unhealthy relationships because I always thought that there was something wrong with me. I slept around a lot. And I'm like, you know, this can't be. It's probably them. It's them. It's them. But it was really me telling myself, like, this ain't it, baby girl. Until the first time that I slept with a woman. And even though we used a toy, it felt natural and amazing. And I felt whole. When I'm being held by a woman, it makes me feel whole. You know, but I also like men, but I also like people. You know, I look at trans men and I think that they're so beautiful. And the scars, I've always had a fascination with scars. There's like stories behind them. And just looking at the journey that trans men go through to becoming their whole selves is beautiful to me. And then even with trans women, you know, the journey that they go through to become women is just as beautiful too. And, you know, the way that I look at it, they're not just trans men and trans women. they're men and women becoming their whole self. And then there's people like me who identify as they, them, and then the non-binary people. And, I love that too, because why do we have to be man or woman? Why can't we be ourselves? And I like that as well. Like, I'm now exploring the idea of identifying as a pansexual instead of a lesbian. Like, I hate that word. And I've always, disliked that word, like lesbian, lesbiana, marimacha. Like, those words have always been so hurtful to me. And I've always hated identifying as that. And, learning to love myself and my identity and who I choose to sleep with. It's still a never-ending cycle of not just loving myself, but also accepting myself.
Thank you, Viv. I'm like hearing your words, and each of them are like touching my heart. They're touching my soul, because you naming and being so transparent with your queer journey, like, is always signaling that queerness or queer identity is never going to be like a very linear process, right? It's like, again, just like a majority of our identities, they can shift, right? Like, and how we identify, how we self-identify, how we feel about them are going to shift. And I think in that sense, your stories about knowing that you were queer, but then also exploring the labels, that feel authentic to you are really important, because I think that it's okay to feel like words describe you one day, and then in another era of your life, they don't, right? In another season of your life, they don't. And that's also a really beautiful process. What does queerness mean to you?
Love, infinite love, acceptance, self-expecting love of yourself. Because it hasn't been a journey. My coming out story was not easy. It was not nice. And when, during June, when people come out with their, coming out stories, or they end up being sweet, and I'm just like, there's a little bit of resentment there, I have to admit, because out of those beautiful coming out stories, the majority of us, that's not how it is. That's not how it was. And I think that it is important to also talk about those stories, because coming out isn't this beautiful moment to make money from. It's very ugly. And living in that truth that it was ugly is beautiful, because if we are here today and we are able to talk about that ugly moment in our lives, it means that we survived and made our journey our own and made it beautiful to ourselves, even though it started ugly.
Absolutely. Something that's coming to mind is, I think lately, for me, I've been thinking about, survival and what that means, right? Especially in talking to more queer Peruvians, hearing our stories, thinking about like all that we've gone through to be able to survive, right? And I think that in that process, you naming, you know, the ugliness that occurs, right? The realities of many people's coming out, and then making it beautiful, right? I think that there's also a way that survival can be pleasurable. I think that there's a way that survival can have aspects of, you know, creativity, of fun, of joy in that, right? In the process of creating, you know, something ugly and making it beautiful, right? It's a journey, it's a process, it's not an overnight thing. And the same with coming out, right? I want to honor that the resentment that you feel, you know, at seeing the stories and of seeing, you know, just joyful ones, because I think the reality is that whether the journey was joyful, right, whether that initial coming out was joyful, it almost feels like there's a threat, right? There's always a constant threat. We are hearing a lot of issues of, you know, disproportionate amounts of harm and violence towards queer and trans folks, right? Always. Whether that's in the US, whether that's in Peru, right? And it also tells me, right, that coming out isn't just a one-time thing, right? Constantly having to make that decision of who we come out to, where do we need to do it, and then what is the person or people's reaction going to be when we do come out, right?
Yes.
Always. Thank you for naming that, Viv. But, you know, in thinking of seeing these stories and hearing these stories, what does queer community mean to you? Do you think you found a queer community?
I have not found a queer community. I think I have yet to find a queer community that is accepting of each other and not throwing shade at each other, not judging each other, not being mean, how people identify, not. It's been very, very hard. I mean, like, I have friends, but I wouldn't go as far as call them, you know, my queer community. I feel queer community is riddled in white patriarchy. And that is something that I want no part of. Because white men always center themselves and their struggle and don't take into account how, yes, they have struggled being queer, but they're also white. And that skin privilege is something that Black and Indigenous queer people did not have. Yes, white men were thrown in jail for being queer, but Black and Indigenous people were murdered and abused. Black and Indigenous people died at alarming rates from catching the virus. There is a higher number of white AIDS patient survival than it is of Black and Indigenous people. And so when people talk about queer community, and I wouldn't even want to call it that. You know, these are just my friends. You guys are we're just people who just accept each other. And some of us happen to be gay. Some of us happen to be straight. And we're Peruvian and we're accepting of each other.
Yeah, I think you're speaking to It sounds like you're speaking to the heteronormative perceptions of queerness, right, of queer community. And it often still erases the experiences of Black, Indigenous people of color, right, queer, trans folks of color. And I appreciate you making that distinction, of how you see queer community. For you, if you had to think of your community, then what does it look like?
My friends, you guys, maybe family, but my friends are my family. So I guess in a way I kind of already have that, but I don't want to group people as my queer community because not everyone is queer. So I kind of want to say my tribe.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I like that. What does it mean for you to simultaneously identify as Peruvian and queer?
Being Peruvian is my culture. It's the motherland that runs through my blood. While being queer is my way of life. It's my identity coming full circle. And it is cradling me and allowing me to walk in my truth.
Yeah, that's really beautiful, Viv. You're naming your Peruvian and queer identities in these ways. Do you feel that they coexist in the same spaces that you're in?
Yes. Because just because I'm queer doesn't mean I'm not Peruvian. And just because I'm Peruvian doesn't mean I can't be queer. I think they're part of who I am. And since I've been trying to live within my truth, being both Peruvian and being queer I wake up like that. There's not one day where I'm not queer and Peruvian.
Yeah, they're always a part of you, right?
Yeah.
I remember someone asking me once, like, do you like being queer or do you like being Peruvian, right? And it's like, how can I choose? Right?
Yeah. You could be both. Like, what are you going, because you're Peruvian, you're going to hide that you're queer? That doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. I think that also, when I think of at least perception from some Peruvians back home, right, back in Peru, I think that mentality exists, right? It's like going back to what is the ideal Peruvian, it is white, affluent Peruvian, light-skinned Peruvian, but it's also, right, a cishet Peruvian. It's like someone who is not queer and trans, right? It's this mentality of what it means to be the right Peruvian also encompasses, this heterosexism, right? This mentality of what it means to be a proper citizen in Peru. And I'm curious.
It can go back to colonialism because, being homophobic, it's a white thing. It's a colonial mentality. There's queerness everywhere, and it goes back millions of years to our First Nation peoples. You know, the Incas were queer.
Mm-hmm.
People just don't know about it. Like, there's just, you know, even in history, queerness, being able to identify as two-spirit, which is how I identify. You're thought of as powerful, a being that encompasses both femininity and masculinity, and being able to form it as one, living best of both worlds, you know, being able to radiate this type of aura, this type of power that can be both healing in feminine and masculine ways. So for these Peruvians that have that type of mindset where it's like, oh, you know, that is against X, Y, and Z, it's still a colonial mindset. We've been so manipulated and brainwashed, and the way that we viewed our spirituality, you know, and we're like super Roman Catholic now, that we have forgotten that our peoples were the first guardians of our lands, that we've acknowledged how powerful the sun is, how powerful the water and the earth and the elements are. Those were our gods. Those are the people that we thanked for. And they have forgotten that because they have allowed to be in this sunken place of a colonial religion, where it pushes us to not be accepting of people who are living in their whole truth.
Yeah, it goes back to colonization, right?
Mm-hmm.
Continue to see how settler colonialism still impacts
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's impacting the US, of course, but like, I think that, you know, for Peru to have been a land, right, of indigenous, of Black people first, right, it says something that we continue to have a colonial mentality, right? It's continual, and we've seen it in the government, we've seen it in the people, we've seen it in these elections that just happened, right? Like how that mentality continues to impact us. You know, and on that note, this might be a big question, but, you know, I'm curious when I talk to folks, because, you know, we know that queer and trans Peruvians, you know, queer and trans folks broadly, you know, like I named earlier, experience harm, violence. Many of us pay for it with our bodies, right, with our lives.
Yes.
And so my question to you is, you know, how do we as queer Peruvians, how do we survive that? How do we survive those experiences of harm, violence? How do we move, right, after we experience that, or knowing that that our, you know, that our siblings are experiencing that? How do we move?
Oh man. I have no idea how I survived that. I think it was my yearning to live, to want to be alive, to want to be loved, to want to be accepted. I think that's what pushed me to survive, to move on. It is researching, looking for resources to be able to heal from these tough moments. It is drawing boundaries and cutting people out of your life that have hurt you far beyond repair because of how you're choosing to identify. You know, survival was not easy. It came with a lot of contemplation of suicidal thoughts. You know, it was looking in the mirror and being able to look at yourself in the mirror and not hate yourself, or hating to look in the mirror because you saw yourself in a body that you didn't like, that you didn't want to accept, because you were being told that you're a sin, that your lifestyle is a sin, and therefore you don't deserve life. It's pushing yourself to want to live and want to heal. I think survival looks different for everyone. I think it's also something that should not be admired, because people shouldn't have had to go through these things to be labeled as resilient. Although there's power in survival, but there's also resentment that creates such a deep hurt. And some of us, yes, become accepting of ourselves, but not everyone heals from that resentment of experiencing such terrible things.
Yeah, Viv, you know, everything that you've shared just makes me feel incredibly, you know, I think humbled, honored to be here and to bear witness to you and to your story, because I think that, you know, recently this, you know, like I mentioned before, thinking about survival and thinking that, you know, to be oppressed means to have to resist all the time, right? Like, what would it be like, right, to not have to? Or what would it be like to just be able to exist, right? And you naming what it has meant for you to survive, you know, there's power there. And, you know, I hear your pain, right? I hear your exhaustion, I hear your resentment, and all that is valid, boo. Like that is okay, right? Like that is valid for all of this to be coming up for you as you're sharing. Because we shouldn't have to go through this. No. Right? Period. At the end of the day, just like we should not have to, right? Yeah. To be seen as valuable, right? Or that our lives are worth living because we have survived, right? We shouldn't have to. And I see you and I hear you, you know, and you know, because of the role that I have in Pumas, but I do work that centers, you know, queer, trans, Black, Indigenous people of color. My background is in Black feminist methods, you know, and the tenets of healing justice. So, you know, I always get curious as to how folks are centering their wellness, how they view healing, how they are healing. So I have a few questions that touch on those aspects a little bit, because you've already named, you know, so many ways that you have healed, so many things that you are healing from. Before we get to those, I wonder if there are any other identities that are salient to you that you want to share.
Like,
you know, you named your being Afro-Indigenous, you named identifying as Two-Spirit, you know, your journey as to coming, you know, thinking about being pansexual. If there are any other identities that feel, you know, that feel right to share at this moment, if you would like to.
I think just those. I think, you know, before I touched upon Two-Spirit, I tried, I labeled myself as non-binary because it was something that I just, you know, didn't want to be a woman and I didn't want to be a man because, you know, when I was thinner, I used to hate my facial features. I had a very chiseled jaw. You can definitely notice the masculinity in that. And I hate it. You know, I hated not wearing makeup because I looked like a boy. But then I also go through body dysmorphia where I look at my breasts and I hate my breasts and I hate my body and I hate having curves and I hate looking like a woman. You know, I hate the description of what society, you know, labels as a woman, because I don't feel like I fit that criteria. You know, like if it is, being a woman is more than just having a vagina and being able to procreate and having, you know, wearing makeup and having breasts. You know, like I hated when Caitlyn Jenner stated, they asked her, what is the hardest part about being a woman? And she said, not knowing what to wear. And it just made me think, like, is that really it? Because I want no parts in that. I look at myself every single day in the mirror naked, and I do not like what I see, because it's not just about like body weight. It's the womanhood attached to it that I hate. But then when it came to identifying as non-binary came the word trans. And I don't want to say that I don't like the word, but I don't want to take up that space. That's not a space for me because I do not feel trans. I do not feel that I am in transition to becoming a person outside of what I look like, because I've worked so hard to accept my features, as feminine and as masculine as they are on my face. So to label myself as an NB, as a, you know, trans person of color, because I'm choosing to identify as non-binary, just did not sit well with me. I feel that is a space for other people, and it wasn't for me, and it didn't feel fair. And when I did more research on identity and being two-spirit, and within two-spirit, I really, really loved, because, you know, I am Indigenous. I can identify as that. I can take up that space, and I don't have to conform to anybody's idea of what femininity and masculinity looks like. I can just be me. I can be aggressive and I can be delicate. I can wear makeup. You know, I can live in my skin and wear a baggy t-shirt and jeans with lipstick. And it just sits so much better with me to be able to identify as a Kariwarmi. And it makes me feel more whole.
Yeah, it sounds like to be able to identify as two-spirit feels more expansive, right? Like, and also, you know, this notion of femininity and masculinity, I think that, you know, again, a colonial mentality has taught us that they're fixed, right? That femininity belongs to one body, masculinity belongs to another body, but that's not true, right? And I think it is an ancestral way, it's an indigenous way of understanding ourselves, right? To be able to say that we have both, right? That there is a balance in both masculinity and femininity. And even as you're speaking, Viv, like I see you shift when you're speaking of being two-spirit, how your face lights up.
Yeah.
become more confident, right? Like, and that's really beautiful. That's really beautiful to see. And it makes me feel good to know that you have gotten to a place where that feels right to you, right? That feels authentic to you. So thank you for sharing that. And, like I mentioned, we were going to shift a little bit into thinking about, wellness, healing. So one of my questions is, what does wellness look like for you?
Living in a joyful acceptance of yourself, your expression, your mental health.
Mm-hmm. And what about healing?
Healing is that stumps me. Healing is being able to cry about the things that are currently hurting you and then smiling right after, because you know that you're going to be all right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what a process it is, right? Like to be able to cry and then smile right after. I think it's like right? To me, it always signals a really divine way of being, right? Like taking it back to, like the closer I get in touch with my own indigeneity, the more I realize that the processing of my emotions, that my healing, right? It's a divine way of being.
Yes.
So, crying and smiling after, a valid and really beautiful way of healing. Thank you. I have only a few more questions before we wrap. But one of them is, what about pleasure? Does that come up for you at all when you think of your,
Oh, hell yeah. Hell yeah. I am very big on masturbation. Listen, you're going through a tough day, masturbate. You're sad, masturbate. You're happy, masturbate. Turn on some fucking porn. Grab your favorite toy, replace those batteries, recharge that motherfucker. Do what you have to do, because when you pleasure yourself, you open yourself up to receiving other pleasure. There is no better pleasure than the pleasure that you give to yourself. It's like love. There's no better love than the love you have for yourself, because when you have truly loved yourself and truly have pleasured yourself, you open yourself up to identifying what is going to be good for you and what is not going to be good for you. Because I do believe in, when you are in that type of intimate relationship where you're with someone and you guys are pleasuring each other, I do believe in a shift, a chemical shift within the other person. There's a such thing as having a bad sexual spirit, and that can be transferable. And then you carry that, and then you end up getting yeast infections, UTIs, bacterial vaginosis, all that yucky stuff. You start to notice a change in your own smells that come out of your body. You can prevent those things when you know what it feels like to truly pleasure yourself. You would identify when somebody has that bad sexual spirit. It's loving yourself to the fullest. It is accepting your body. It is loving your body, loving the way that you smell, loving the way that you taste. That type of pleasure is beautiful. And I encourage everyone to go on that journey.
It is important, it is. And you said that, in this form of pleasuring yourself, you open yourself up to other pleasures, right? That's true. And so in thinking about that, right, like we can think of pleasure in so many ways, and sexual pleasure, physical pleasure. And so when you say, it allows you to open up to other pleasures, so how then does pleasure come up for you when you move through life?
It is finding myself in spaces with people and looking at my friends and realizing how deeply in love I am with my friends. It is that love that I have for my friends and the love that my friends have for me that set the bar in how I want to be loved and how I want to be pleasured.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I, being a friend of yours, I can always tell, right, when you interact with folks, how, you naming your own pleasure. Well, when that is like a frequency of vibration that you have, right? Well, that gives me pleasure.
Yes.
That, like, us interacting brings me pleasure. It like makes you just feel better, right? Like to that, you saying that you're so deeply in love with your friends, that's beautiful. That's a really sacred thing.
Yeah. And I feel like we all know different types of love, right? We all find ourselves in this deep, immense love, with other people. But the love that your friends have for you teaches you that this is the love that you deserve. Because the person that's going to love you for the rest of your life has to be able to be your friend, be your companion, not just your lover, but be your mother, your father, your sister, your brother, be all those things in one. Because your friends are those things. Your friends are your chosen family. Your friends become the surrogate mother, the surrogate sibling, the surrogate parent. And you're going to want that type of support from your partner. And if your partner can't give you that type of support, then that's not the relationship that you should be in, because relationships are about teamwork. It's give and take. And for someone to tell you that it's not, then they don't know shit about relationships. Relationships are a partnership. It is not meeting each other halfway, but running in the same direction. It's being able to be free, being able to be yourself and not just be someone's media naranja, because then that means that you're not whole. It is not giving 50 and another person giving 50. It is giving your full self and still being able to give yourself 100 as well.
Yeah. And as you're speaking about this relationship, right? I think that to be able to nurture and nourish your relationships, there's within love, right? There's processes of holding each other, of being accountable to each other, of working together. And so when you're speaking to this, it sounds like this thinking of pleasure, is tied to you thinking of love, right? And what love looks like for you. And in thinking of that, I'm always really moved when folks are able to name, their forms of love and the ways that they nurture themselves and the way that they nurture, you know, others that they're around. And so my last two questions, maybe along those lines, but one of them is, what do you wish for yourself?
Oh my God. What do I always say when 11/11 hits? You know, I wish for happiness and clarity. Mm-hmm. I want to live in joy and walk in joy and carry happiness with me wherever I go. And I wish for clarity because clarity helps me identify what's wrong, helps me, you know, identify my own toxicity so it can be fixed, so I can fix it, so I can heal it. You know, it's that I knowledge as well, to be able to pass it down.
So important, you know, and even in that, right, recognizing your own toxicity, the holding of accountability, right, in relationships where you have a relationship with yourself, right? So that is a way to hold yourself accountable, right, to be better, to your highest self. And so what about for queer Peruvians? What do you wish for them, for us?
Oh my God, I wish for them to be accepted. I wish for them to continue living in their truest form, continue craving joy and finding joy and live in joy. I wish for them to find their tribe and be so immensely loved and accepted and nurtured and held. You know, I wish for them to know that type of love. I wish for them to have love within themselves, being able to look in the mirror and say, like, yo, you a bad bitch.
Mm-hmm. Well, Viv, you got me emotional. I'm out here like, quiere llorar.
Yeah.
Your entire interview. Thank you for you know, your words, your wishes for, you know, for other queer Peruvians who may listen. I always sit in like really, really deep gratitude whenever I finish one of these interviews, because I know that it takes a lot of, you know, a lot of courage, it's radical honesty, it's vulnerability and transparency to be able to share your story. I'm grateful that you reached out. You were the first to reach out to me.
Yeah.
You're the first, you know, and it means a lot, you know, that there was like no hesitation. You just, right. You reached out. And that really means a lot. And so just thank you. And
thank you for holding this space, because I mean, like, one way or another, all our stories need to be heard. Mm-hmm. So I'm grateful for you in doing this.
Cool. Is there anything else you wish to share with me before we wrap? Okay. All right, Bill. So again, I'm super grateful to you. But if there is nothing else, I will go ahead and stop the recording.